Do you find housing expensive and unavailable in the places that you want to live? Do you suffer from economic precarity, struggling to keep up with your bills? Do you fear humankind has overdrawn from the earth, fomenting decades of future oligarchic rule and global instability? These, among many societal ailments, can be traced back to one single thing. This is a video essay about cars. But let me preface by saying, cars are cool. Cars are quite the engineering marvel that has brought human mobility and productivity to incredible heights. They've become so cool, people actually make movies about them. How else could Vin Diesel ever have a proper movie career if they weren't cool?
And that's not always as easy as it looks.
I mean, think about it. When was the last time you had adrenaline coursing through your veins while watching a chase on bicycles?
Oh, I'm gonna run. I hate it when they run.
They can run. We can fly.
Cue electric guitar wail. Chef's kiss.
Take your time, boys. All you gotta do is aim.
Oh no, what are they doing? What are they doing?
What are you waiting for, you moron? Shoot!
Why is nobody moving? They can't hit us if we're going straight at them. Oh no, I told you to go straight at them. There was a time that I loved cars. I owned my very own 1990 Acura Integra. And I did my own repairs. I even attempted, unsuccessfully, to save up enough money to get subwoofers installed in my trunk. What's that, Grandma? You want to ride to the doctor's? Well, your wheelchair won't fit in the trunk with my woofers! Woofers aside, cars have lots of other upsides. They can be sites of meaningful social interaction, for conversation. They provide privacy and comfort from the outside world. Cars can influence people's sense of self, sometimes in positive ways, as mediums of self-expression or markers of accomplishment. And people just don't want cars. They need them. For many, they are essential necessities, especially for those who live in isolated towns and rural areas. Many people with physical disabilities also depend on them for mobility. They can also be a person's only means of subsistence, whether it be the thing you rely on to get to work, to put food on the table, or even the place to go home to and sleep at night because you don't have a proper house. Cars have and will serve a purpose for a very long time. And unfortunately, this is an utterly terrible thing. We think we own cars, that they are simply tools that humans wield in service to themselves, when actually, the reverse. Cars own us. Cars enjoy our blind embrace, even when they kill us en masse or accelerate the degradation of the planet. Worst of all, they've crippled our imagination of cities, void of any alternative, where every bit of available space in our built environment is dedicated to the car's efficient functioning and well-being, instead of people. Cars, once thought to bring us closer together, in reality are driving us farther apart. Literally. And this has disastrous consequences, not only for health and environment, but also on housing. Hence, we come to part 3 of my video series on housing, where I tried to get to the bottom of why people struggled and failed to provide shelter, a fundamental need for themselves. Of course, many like to point the finger at various culprits: tech bro gentrifiers, big real estate, private equity, not in my backyarders, aka NIMBYs. But perhaps the more interesting culprit is more machine now than man. Now I know there is a lot of car critical content out there, but indulge me on this more systemic examination of the science and ethics of car dependency, its effect on housing, and by proxy, how it has reoriented people toward hostility. And hopefully, give a roadmap as to what we can do about it, whether you hate driving or love it. Content warning, this video will contain frequent discussions of human harm and death, including video depictions of scary incidents, however, no depictions of known serious harm or fatality.
Hey man, using my face.
I'm in your face.
Just a scrap of paper, a permit to drive, and sometimes die on our highways.
Yeah. Oh my god.
Not bad.
Introduction. The ubiquity of auto car brain. A tourist came in from Orbitville, parked in the air and said, "The creatures of this star are made of metal and glass. Through the transparent parts you can see their guts. Their feet are round and roll, on diagrams long, measuring tapes dark, with wide lines. They have 4 eyes, the 2 in the back are red. They all hiss as they glide like inches, down the marked tapes, those soft shapes, shadowy inside. The hard bodies are they, their guts, or their brains." Ah, science fiction. The sobering reminder of the human condition. Mae Swenson wrote this poem called Southbound on the Freeway in 1963. By that time, the post-war industrial boom made cars so ubiquitous, she thought aliens who visited Earth could very well mistake cars as the dominant life form.
Hey.
Do you think it was a bit strange? I was trying to shake hands with a car.
I assumed you were drunk.
I thought cars were the dominant life form. I was trying to introduce myself. He said...
There are an estimated 2 billion motor vehicles in use on the planet today, of which about 1.3 billion are cars. So standardized, even AI can't comprehend anything beyond cars.
Look at how elongated they are.
In the United States alone, for every 5 people, there are 4 cars. In fact, 92% of occupied housing units have access to at least one vehicle, and 87% use their cars daily. Those drivers average 60.7 minutes behind the wheel, covering a distance of 29.1 miles each day in 2023. That's a total of 95 billion hours spent driving and 2.7 trillion miles traveled in that year alone. Not all miles are created equal, of course. Many of them are spent in traffic. According to INRIX, the average American loses 43 hours of their lives per year in traffic. 62 if you're a Brit, and if you happen to live in New York, Chicago, or London, you'll be spending over 100 hours in traffic per year. Among commuters, the number of infamous super commuters, people spending an average of around 2 hours and 20 minutes to get to work or to get from work, are growing post-pandemic. For those people, that's close to 5 of 16 waking hours sitting in their car per day. Why would humans put up with this? Why would they expend such effort just to encase themselves in a 2-ton metal box? But look how excited they get. They even gift them to each other. And like, what's up with these giant bows? Isn't that like a little gauche, even for humans? Oh, by the way, in order to make room for your speeding metal box, you need to cover the earth in a combination of crude oil and rocks and put this asphalt mixture between your home and all the other places you're trying to get to. Great. Something smooth to walk on, right? Or is it? God help you if you don't happen to own one of these metal boxes. You'd be stranded in that sea of asphalt. I mean, you could brave that sea on foot and trust that the other speeding metal boxes can see you, which I'm sure they always do.
Running across the street when she was hit. Somehow she only suffered minor scratches.
Otherwise, if people see you plotting on your little meat appendages to do essential activities, well, you're an embarrassing failure. Where's your 2-ton metal box? Couldn't afford one. Cars have been so normalized, scholars have come up with about 101 names to articulate it. Motonormativity, motordom, car culture, car dependence, car centrism, being car pilled, windshield bias, auto dominance, motophilia, auto eroticism, traffic circle, lube fest, and my personal favorite, a lemon party. One researcher of motonormativity defines this as unconscious biases due to cultural assumptions about the role of private cars by individuals and policymakers. For example, studies in both the UK and the US suggest that people are really not okay with you smoking a cigarette next to them, exposing them to toxic fumes, but when it comes to exposing you to toxic fumes with an idling car, well, fair game. For all intents and purposes, we'll refer to this phenomena as car brain. And I have bad news. Car brain is killing us. Remember, not only do we spend a lot of time in 2-ton metal boxes, we have to propel that box at deadly speeds. According to a meta-study which aggregates hundreds of other studies on harms related to cars, appropriately titled Car Harm, shows that globally, 1 in 34 deaths are caused by cars and automobility, with 1.67 million deaths per year, totaling 60 to 80 million deaths since their invention. Because cars are responsible for this much death, society approaches driving privileges with the utmost care and responsibility. No, it doesn't. According to AAA's Traffic Safety Culture Index, a majority, 60% of drivers profiled in the US were classified as, quote, risky, aka exhibiting dangerous behaviors such as distracted driving and speeding. Perhaps because driving is now such a commonplace daily ritual, it's easy to lose focus while doing it and ignore the real dangers. That translates to 3,308 people killed in 2022 due to distracted driving, and an estimated additional 289,000 people injured, according to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. The supremacy of driving not only diminishes responsibility on the part of drivers, it also displaces responsibility when shit goes really wrong. Up until recently, when auto-related fatalities are talked about, they were always deemed accidents, regardless of negligence or recklessness, and framed in a way that takes away the agency of the driver. This line of messaging was no accident, as the auto industry has a long history of successful propagandizing to whitewash the dangers of cars and shift blame of any suffering to non-drivers. Some good videos on it here. Ever notice when car crashes are reported in the media, it always uses passive voice, as if they were tiptoeing around the fact there was probably a clear perpetrator in any given situation. Most recently, when a motorist plowed through Bourbon Street in New Orleans, headlines suggest the responsibility goes to the inanimate object. Journalists have fortunately become aware of this stupid-ass habit, dubbed by some as the exonerative tense. In 2016, the Associated Press updated its style guidance to avoid using the word accident because of its exonerative qualities, and have opted to use crash or collision instead. What's worse, we tend to bias against the actual victims of vehicular violence. One scholar in an aptly titled paper shows how we linguistically and rhetorically distance perpetrators from actual blame. Take pedestrians, for instance, often described as walking, quote, into the path of a speeding vehicle, with absolutely no consideration given to either the driver's behavior or the built environment. Arnulfo Salazar, who was killed by an off-duty police officer, was reportedly, quote, not within the marked crosswalk or wearing reflective clothing. There being no crosswalk within several hundred meters, and the sun actually being up at the time of the collision. Just as much as pedestrians, cyclists also get the narrative shaft. One particular case in summer of 2023, a work van driver struck and killed 15-year-old Brody Champlain Kingman in the beach town of Encinitas, California. By all accounts, locals knew him as a play-it-by-the-rules type of guy. Quote, really safe.
He's really safe.
uses turn signals. He's cautious, and I've just never known him as a risk taker.
Not to mention, he was wearing his helmet. It's very straightforward. A driver strikes a cyclist. Yet, the incident was given the typical exonerative treatment, rendering it as a simple e-bike crash, with many articles describing the incident as him changing lanes into the path of the vehicle. Cut and dry, case closed. Or is it? Instead of a conversation around traffic safety or unsafe road design, panic ensued over the scourge of e-bikes, with the town council proposing to regulate their usage. The incident itself inspired this car-brained, pearl-clutching rant from the New York Times, essentially about how e-bikes are running amok in our streets. Imagine applying the exonerative tense in any other situation.
From Dallas, Texas, 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, President Kennedy's head moves into the path of a bullet.
There isn't just bias, there's a lot of animus against non-motorists by people who feel entitled to our roads.
I'd smack you so good. If there wasn't any witnesses, you know what I'd do to you? I'd pull Trump on you.
What's your name?
Despite the fact that people who opt for other modes of transportation are actually doing motorists a favor by taking a car off our already congested streets. It's one less car you can fight over parking. Aggravated vehicular homicide of cyclists, like someone actually spotting a cyclist, hitting the gas, and deliberately committing video game style violence, is getting captured on video more and more. In an utterly harrowing incident posted on social media, well, let's just say it had some pretty unsavory opinions. The cyclist in this incident uncommonly, or rather miraculously, survived with minor injuries, as his bicycle bucked the tire of this SUV at precisely the right timing. A vast majority of others have not been so lucky, and it's extremely common for perpetrators to flee the scene in a hit and run. This represents a real mismatched power dynamic between driver and non-driver. The dead rendered unable to tell their own version of events. Perhaps that is why it's so easy to be tricked into believing that the person not in the car is always at fault. It's almost akin to police violence, where the survivor in any given situation is in control of the narrative. Or maybe it's because society naturally situates its own framing into the role of the driver by default, and harsh judgment is always applied to the victim. Speaking of which, you know what else gets propelled at deadly speeds in the US every day? Bullets. Guns. People buy them because they feel unsafe, in part because other people possess guns. But the more people possess guns, the more people feel unsafe. Guns. A hobby sometimes treated unseriously at the leisure of the gun owner, but at the peril of others.
Anyone else want a beer?
Guns. Killing about 47,000 people per year in the US. If you think we need gun control, we should probably be making the case for car control with a similar amount of zeal. Cars. People buy them because they feel unsafe, in part because they need to share space with other people who possess them, which in turn makes them feel unsafe. Cars, a hobby sometimes treated unseriously at the leisure of the driver, but at the peril of others.
Spiridon is disappointed after a judge sentenced a street racer who killed her sister and brother-in-law to 90 days of home detention.
Equate it to school shootings. Until we make any changes, it's going to keep happening, and it's going to increase. I equate a car to a weapon, just like a gun. You can treat a car like a weapon.
Cars kill a similar number of people as guns do. There's one key nuance here. A vast majority of shootings are intentionally self-inflicted. In other words, if you fear for your child's life because of the possibility of a school shooting, your efforts are probably more productively spent trying to insulate your child from road violence. The simple act of living on an active street already presents a hazard for children far deadlier than the threat of a mass shooter, even though the likelihood of mass shootings are intolerably high anyways. If you live in America, chances are you know somebody who has died from a car accident. I myself can count on more than one hand direct relations of mine who've been killed by cars. This is made worse with bigger cars, like trucks and SUVs. In fact, they are 8 times deadlier than traditional cars due to its higher surface area. In the US, they're responsible for an excess of 18% of pedestrian deaths. From another vantage point, big cars inflict a death toll equivalent of a Sandy Hook shooting in parking lots alone every day.
Jackie Foshi's 4-year-old little boy died after she accidentally ran him over in her large SUV in their Virginia driveway.
He opened the gate and I drove very slowly, like all the way up, and then he wasn't there. I thought he was getting the mail, and you know your worst nightmare, he was under the car.
And of course, pursuing safety issues is arguably harder for cars than it is for guns. Cars enjoy a sense of immunity. They are more ubiquitous, a necessity of daily life, and after all, you don't ride a gun to work every day. But wait a tick, to the contrary, guns are very ubiquitous, at least in the United States. Cars are not a necessity of daily life, given how many people in other countries get around with ease in a car-free manner. And while you're not literally riding a gun to work, you are riding a deadly weapon. And if you don't treat it like one, then I'm gonna say, you got a good old case of car brain. But let's go beyond the death figures for a moment and look at the morality conundrum that both guns and cars impose on us. Cars, like guns, placate one's desire for dominance in their interaction with others. They allow a sense of equalization to make sure that we'll always be on equal footing, in the case of guns, against an armed assailant, or have superiority over someone who isn't armed. Accordingly, cars, especially really big ones, grant superiority in their ability to see over others and to make sure they get the best of any collision, so as long as their car is heavier than yours.
Last year in South Carolina, an SUV hit a compact car head-on. The SUV driver survived. The driver of the smaller car was killed.
No wonder road rage is a thing. If driving is a life or death game, it's only natural to rise to anger if someone is breaking the rules or acting out of line. Cars, just like guns, are an enabler of one's narcissism against the collective. One gets to internalize the benefits of being behind the gun, the wheel, but the costs are externalized at those you're pointing the machine at. Innocent people who happen to be in the path of your weapon will just have to trust you that you will make the right decision, because if you don't, someone loses a life. We should ask ourselves, is this a just power dynamic? A fair distribution of responsibility? Is it worth reproducing every day, every time we leave our house? Everyone, of course, trusts themselves more than they do others. According to studies, 73% of drivers will rate their driving skills as above average. This is called the Lake Wobegon effect, named after a fictional town where all of its children are considered to be above average. How else can we bring ourselves to accept the ability to kill others with ease, with the fewest regulations possible, if it weren't a matter of only trusting ourselves? Because of course, you are a good driver. It's everyone else that's the problem. That's why this quote is making the rounds, especially recently. You aren't in traffic, you are the traffic. Cars instill a sense of main character syndrome, the tendency to treat yourself as the protagonist in a narrative and everyone else often being a sidekick or a villain. This is readily apparent in car commercials, where they're always depicted alone on vast stretches of road or in ways absolutely inaccessible to the average driver. It's you versus the world, and therefore any effect you have in making that world collectively more dangerous, well, it's best not to think about it. It justifies your participation in the safety arms race, but ironically, that makes everyone, including yourself, less safe. You're not the ultimate beneficiary in this individualistic delusion. Guess who is? The auto industry, the oil and gas industry, politicians who pander to the desires of the automotively privileged. It was special interests like these who helped coin the term jaywalking, basically a derogatory term for an unmodern hillbilly, and to finally criminalize walking in places otherwise reserved for cars, with the added effect of stigmatizing pedestrians in a victim-blaming narrative.
The jaywalker. He crosses the street anywhere he likes. In the middle of the block, he just walks into the traffic. And you know what a jay is? Well, besides being a bird, it also means a silly person. And that is just what the jitter-brained jaywalker is.
It is special interests who get to reap the benefits of built environments optimized for car speed, such as the proliferation of stroads, one part street, because it's where pedestrians tend to congregate, but one part road, which maximizes speed for impatient drivers. The danger of this type of design is discussed in more depth in Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, about how society overuses stroads to try to get the best of both worlds, but at their very own peril. Numerous pedestrians die on stroads each year, and their very nature makes it impossible to make them safe. The site in which Champlain Kingman was killed in Encinitas was a 6-lane bike hostel stroad. It's special interests that profit off building and marketing big cars with tax loopholes. Essentially, they make more money when they sell more car in a single transaction. Now, they account for 46% of global car sales, putting us on a transition from having 2-ton projectiles flying everywhere to 3-ton projectiles. Bad for human safety, good for business. My point, if you're a critic of capitalism, you should probably realize that capitalism thrives off of car brain, despite how dangerous that makes our built environment. Speaking of capitalism, cars are making us poor. Some viral content making the rounds is, how much is your car payment? Oftentimes, Twitter posts of dealership employees paying exorbitant monthly payments for their own cars.
Hey sir, what is your car payment?
Mine is $1,325.
And what kind of vehicle is that?
It's a 22 Ford Raptor.
This dealership in particular is in Surprise, Arizona. Arizona, just crushing it with the names. Santa Claus. Why? Nothing. Surprise! The median income in Surprise, Arizona, which actually stands above the Arizona average, is around $94,000. So if these figures shared by the dealership employees are true, that means they're paying about 1/5 their income on car payments. Either way, it's no surprise that people put themselves into an incredible amount of debt just to possess a car. 1 year of monthly payments might only make a dent, as this lady who went viral found out, that $50,000 in payments only amounted to about
$10,000 of the balance. So my $84,000 car that I bought 3 years ago is now still at a balance of about almost $75,000.
Yet this is what we all have to go through if we want to maintain our subscription to normal participation in public life. But the cost of ownership is not the only thing you pay, of course. The more complete assessments show that this subscription actually costs you about $12,000 to $13,000 per year. A survey done by MarketWatch shows that respondents spend on average 20% of their income on cars, and 2 out of 5 drivers felt that their car expenses impaired their ability to afford other essentials. And guess what? Car prices are on the rise. According to Kelley Blue Book, last year, the average price of a new car was around $48,000 and around $27,000 for a used vehicle. Cars aren't the metal clunkers they used to be, able to be repaired by your everyday grease monkey. No, they are much more sophisticated pieces of machinery, fully equipped with computers and sensors, with much more microchippy things, a technical term. You likely need heavily specialized repairs, even for minor fender benders. And as luck has it, those microchippy things have a really bad habit of getting supply constrained, bubbling your costs even further. Don't even get me started on the most microchippy cars of them all, EVs. But let's say you survive the cost of paying off the vehicle itself. Well, as luck would have, you still got to pay insurance. And I have bad news. Insurance is also going up. In fact, rates increased around 22.2% more than around the same time last year, up 38% when compared to January 2020's numbers. Why? Well, I've already covered. The insurance risk pool is now cluttered with higher value cars. But remember the whole distracted driving spiel I gave you? Well, nowadays, people are driving distracted. And it's only going to get worse the more apps optimize themselves to addict our attention, which means more crashes, which means more cost. This is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the escalating costs of car ownership. I didn't even get into rising gas prices, inflation, and these other factors. There is a solution to this. We can allow people alternatives to selling their own kidneys just to operate a piece of industrial machinery. Maybe there's a way to avoid the mini heart attack you get when you see your check engine light come on your way to work. Maybe you could walk. But this is America, baby. You'd think you can't just walk places? Oh, hey, I happen to find a home just 400 feet from the school my children go to. Let's just put in some walking directions here. Oh. What the hell? 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 What the? Looks like your pristine, sprawled suburban community forces you to take unnecessarily circuitous routes only accessible by car. Cul-de-sac. I booked a room at the Hilton Meadowlands to see my New York Giants play. Whoops. Help! I trapped myself in a freeway moat! You can try to cross those roadways. That is, of course, if you want to do something illegal and dangerous.
Independency matters most to Damien Hudlin. He was born with spinal bifida.
In 2015, I lost my leg to a bone infection, and that's how I ended up in a wheelchair.
Damien was leaving this 7-Eleven on Wintergreen Road in DeSoto, heading home just up the street when a police officer stopped him. Although the warning says Damien must appear in court or a warrant will be issued for his arrest, the city of DeSoto tells us he doesn't have to go to court.
All I asked was for a sidewalk. That's it. That's it. I don't need you to pay me for the rest of my life. I just want a sidewalk.
A public need to continue living independently.
Sorry, Damien. Don't you know that sidewalks are optional in this place? Hence the term side, like side salad. There are, of course, exceptions, places in America with good public transit and housing more proximate to job centers, but just like cars, looks like living in these places appears to be a luxury privilege. Sounds like you got to drive till you qualify, as the old real estate saying goes, meaning you commit to buying a home no matter how far. The further the distance from desirable economic centers, the more affordable housing gets. Congratulations! You've been promoted to super commuter. You are now officially dependent on your 2-ton metal box, and you're that much poorer because of it. But car dependency not only robs you of money, it robs society as a whole, because driving till you qualify, practiced on a mass scale, creates sprawl. Simply put, cars are not built for cities. Cities are built for cars. That means, in technical terms, we build far apart within driving distance and not walking distance. And building far apart is inefficient. To help you grasp this, the firm Urban3 has produced very helpful visualizations showing that building closer together, aka density, allows for more valuable economic activity. Most importantly, that value helps sustain, well, whatever you're doing on top of that piece of land in the form of tax revenue, infrastructure, or services. Simply put, more density means more money boners, which not only benefits the piece of land, but also the entire region. Contrast this with the sprawled out bits, often zoned for single-family detached homes, as shown by these sad, drooping downward spikes. What this tells us is that American cities love creating financial black holes for themselves. It's almost as bad a financial decision as owning a Tesla Cybertruck. Sprawl requires more costly infrastructure like sewage, power, internets, for fewer people at greater distances. Worst of all that distance fosters car dependence, requiring costly expenditures on roads and parking spaces. And hold on, wait a minute. You might be thinking, roads cost money? You bet your asphalt it does. In fact, depending on the type of road, it can cost anywhere between $2 million to $11 million US per mile. Take an additional 3% a year for maintenance, and you got yourself a strain on the public coffers. But then you might think, hey, once they're built, don't they last forever? Well, as transportation engineer Samuel Schwartz states, well within their predicted lifespans, those bridges, roads, and highways need replacing. A highway deck lasts no more than 40 years, 20 in regions with severe winter weather. Roads may last forever, but that also means that they consume resources forever too. The United States has more roads per citizen than any other country by a long shot. It's no surprise that many cities are going bankrupt because of this, and I would recommend this video by Echo Gecko if you need more evidence. I hope he's still making more videos. Think about the next time you scoff at a big price tag of a big public transit project, which, in case you're curious, unlike road-rich localities, transit-rich localities get more money boners. Just look at these transit-oriented districts in Salt Lake City, Utah, which pull 4 times their weight in terms of economic productivity.
It's 3% of the land area within the 5-minute walk of the train stations are pulling 11% of the value. So this is a really good place to start because you're getting good value in those areas. It's like a 4-to-1 ratio of productivity.
We not only dedicate heaps of asphalt and concrete to cars in motion, we also love to gift it to cars standing still. Yes, parking. This turns out to be a formidable drain on the economy, especially when it's offered for free. And as I say this, I'm doing air quotes. Free. In the US, it is common to force property owners and businesses by law to host parking spaces through what's called mandatory parking minimums, saddling them essentially with dead space. Mandatory meditation room for cars, if you will, so they can sit quietly and rest after a long journey. Unfortunately, it's not so free if you consider the fact that it costs money to build and maintain, but more importantly, restrict it from being used for any other productive purpose. Let's say fitting another business right next to your existing business. That cost also gets baked into higher prices for customers. This unexpectedly high cost of free parking was expounded upon in a very influential body of research called The High Cost of Free Parking by Donald Shoup, who became something of an urban planning legend and whose home website is shoupdog.com. By Shoup's estimates, parking is subsidized between $102 billion and $372 billion in the US. And if you doubt his methodology, pick up the book. You'll find it very comprehensive. So comprehensive, it will make everyone want to advocate for the end of parking mandates and subsidies.
Everyone parks free at everyone else's expense.
Spotting a pattern here? Dense localities with fewer roads and parking disproportionately pay for the costs of sprawl, and those dense areas can often be home to working class, lower income communities, aka the people who should be least expected to make up deficiencies for sprawled areas often inhabited by wealthier populations. It's essentially regressive taxation, welfare for the rich. It's elaborated in this video by Not Just Bikes. Similarly, Shoup argues that
off-street parking requirements harm all families, but especially poor families. Although all households in the US do not own a car, they pay for parking in the form of higher prices for everything they buy. Imposing hidden costs on the entire population to subsidize parking takes money from the poorest renters to subsidize richer homeowners. Ooh, that was it. Damn. This is what happens when you practice like for an hour over and over and over again.
Hey, listen, driving a private vehicle to get places, I'm sure, gives people a sense of happiness, freedom, and convenience. But we should not be conflating that luxury as a necessity. Driving, for the amount of space and resources it requires, is just that, a luxury. And to expect society at large to shoulder the cost to provision that luxury for as many people as possible, it's a net drag on the economy. But even worse, it gives poor people the shaft. I don't think I have time to delve into government subsidies, aka handouts to the auto industry. Let's do it. The government subsidizes the auto industry to the tune of billions. Much of that comes in the form of funding a vast playground for all our cars to move really fast. That is, our federal and state highway system, including its construction, maintenance, with very little financial expectation in return. To give you a sense, the U.S. Department of Transportation requests around $62 billion in highway funding per year, very little of which earns back anything in revenue through, for example, tolls. And that amount absolutely pales in comparison to the maintenance backlog of all of the country's total road and capital needs, which, according to the American Society of Civil Engineers Infrastructure Report Card, stands at a cool $786 billion. You know, to make sure bridges don't rage quit on society.
Your evaluation is so nuts. We're never going to get there. I know.
And don't forget about billions in direct vehicle subsidies. The hot thing to do under the Biden-Harris administration was to subsidize purchasing of EVs. And they're electric. They can't be as bad, right? Well, first off, you have to be okay with the government giving free money to this goon. But also, there's a reason to believe that EV transition will just perpetuate the same overcommitment to car infrastructure we are already suffering from. I can go into this more, or just refer you to a video by Adam something. And if you think the subsidies benefit low-income consumers, well, a Stanford report says that the tax break largely goes to consumers that would have bought an electric vehicle anyways. And that amounts to a whopping $30,000 for every EV sold. The government also has maintained tax loopholes to incentivize the production and sale of big cars. For example, an old law from the 1980s meant to give tax breaks to farmers and construction workers who rely on heavy-duty vehicles over 6,000 pounds. Dubbed the Hummer tax loophole, automakers are like, well, let's just make more 6,000 pound plus cars. And the owner of any small business can get up to a $30,000 tax deduction regardless of how they use it. You, taxpayer, buy that man a Hummer. Do you hate small business? According to International Monetary Fund data, global subsidies for fossil fuels totaled $7 trillion in 2022. You know, those dead plants and animals that have been stewing in the earth that turn into fire juice, and we light that fire juice on fire. So when price of fire juice goes up, governments step in to make price all better. Governments including the United States, which spent an estimated $757 billion in subsidies in 2022. And if you think tax subsidies or tax-based incentives are harmless, think again. Money going to drivers means tax shortfalls that need to be made up elsewhere, like from social safety nets. I could go on about how governments thumb the scale in favor of cars. The important thing you have to ask yourself is, how justified is it for our democratic institutions to prop up such a cost-intensive pastime? Ella Roberta lived in Lewisham, England. She played a dozen musical instruments, was quite the footballer, and a great writer, achieving a reading age of 15 years old. She was only 9. Ella had been battling asthma for years and would suffer painful breathing episodes, requiring resuscitation numerous times. Just 3 weeks after her 9th birthday, she took her final breath. Ella's mother, Rosamund Adukisi Debra, later discovered that the air quality around her home in southeast London exceeded dangerous levels by WHO standards, and those levels would be highest on the night that Ella died. They lived along the South Circular Road, one of the busiest roads for vehicle traffic in the region. Ella became the first person in the world to have air pollution listed as a cause of death on her death certificate. I'd be remiss if I didn't go into the diverse ways that car culture is ruining the environment. Most of what comes to mind is the question of climate and greenhouse gas emissions, which of course is a significant problem. But I reckon there isn't much more that I can add here. Most know cars are an inefficient means to move humans, which spews emissions from burning fossil fuels. The process of manufacturing cars themselves also requires a lot of energy and natural resources. In fact, the total carbon footprint is more heavily weighted in manufacturing rather than driving, and that makes even the promise of EVs pretty overrated. No, cars are ruining the planet in other ways often overlooked. To start with pollution. Pollution was an uproar back then, but it kind of settled down, but I want to highlight it again here. The Ella Roberta Foundation was later established to declare Ella Roberta's death as not an aberration, but a widespread epidemic of deadly air affecting millions of people and killing hundreds of thousands. The aforementioned study on car harms breaks this down into 2 types of pollution. Motor emissions, produced by the running of the vehicle's engine, and second, abrasion emissions, caused by the friction of materials such as tires, brakes, road markings, which can send microplastics and metals, such as lead, airborne and into waterways. The really, really small bits, aka ultra-fine particulate matter, is dangerous to health because they can pass through biological barriers, tissues in the body meant to prevent the bad stuff from reaching your vital organs. The car harm study associates car-related pollution with the following. And globally, the study indicates approximately 246,000 annual deaths are attributable to traffic-related air pollution. For the longest time, my mind had been fixated on the ill effects of cars on human health until I discovered the field of road ecology. And man, does it give us a depressing outlook for animals as well. The book Crossings reviews numerous case studies of animal suffering where scores of animals become roadkill or have their habitats disrupted by road infrastructure. Every single week, more birds die on U.S. roads than those killed in the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And in the state of New York alone, as much as 12% of land-dwelling mammals die on roads. And that's 4 times it was 50 years ago. Here's video footage of endangered animals attempting to negotiate active and dangerous roadways. Okay, this is just a bit to cheer you up, because reality is depressing. One particular jarring case study was when researchers tracked the movements of mountain lion, or cougar, populations in California. One cougar, scientists name P12, migrated into a constricted space, caught between sprawl and freeways in the Santa Monica Mountains. Finding his habitat and social group so isolated, P12 went on an inbreeding spree, mating with his daughter twice, then breeding with his granddaughter, and then his great-granddaughter. Thanks to roads without adequate crossings designed to let animals migrate under or over them, P12's bloodline became more inbred than the families from Game of Thrones. And this level of ridiculous habitat disruption actually happens on a massive scale.
If you're a Kerouac reader, you grew up steeped in the dogma that highways represent freedom. If you're a grizzly bear, they may as well be prison walls.
The solution to all this is fairly simple. A viral pro-housing meme circulated around to demonstrate the presumed answer: cut down on sprawl and build more densely, obviate the needs for roads and thus cars. Yet, there's now an intergenerational schism among environmentalists themselves, what housing writer Jerusalem Demsas dubs as a culture war between, quote, cautious Greens, older generation conservationists, or boomers who learn to be skeptical of all forms of development and will fight any form of government action to build housing more densely. They face off against the crisis Greens, younger generation environmentalists who see the climate writing on the wall and understand that the left side of the picture, which represents the status quo, is untenable if we are to buck our trajectory away from irreversible climate change. Cautious Greens are criticized for their willingness to defend sprawl, since living in a single-family home with at least some natural greenery around might provide some semblance of living in harmony with nature. Hell, you might even own a Subaru Outback. But at the individual level, sure, your house in the woods has a smaller environmental footprint than, say, a skyscraper, but society doesn't work at the individual level. When you think at the collective level, you realize how delusional it is to assume that both the economy and the earth could ever afford this level of reliance on cars and road infrastructure. And here we face a crux. Car brain creates aspirations of individuality that are impossible to sustain if practiced on a collective level. It blinds people to big picture thinking. It's literally missing the forest for the trees. I've been talking a lot, and I feel I've struggled to try to get my point across that the essence of car brain lies within the delusion of having it all. The belief that you can enjoy privileged modes of transportation as an individual without screwing over both the collective and ultimately the individual themselves. Let's for a second metaphorically imagine where all this is headed. Car brain creates a quasi-arms race for road supremacy. Humans with some innate desire to travel quickly and safely take actions to attain that quickness and safety at the expense of others. Sure, cars are big, and sure, they are getting bigger. You know where this is going? Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Say what we're thinking on 3. 1, 2, 3. Aircraft carriers.
1,000 feet long, 200 feet tall, 120 feet wide. These babies will guarantee your ability to see over other vehicles, leaving you feeling much more safe and secure while you tend to your most important daily needs and securing your precious cargo. Afraid of other vessels trying to challenge you for supremacy? Not with these 64mm hull plates, they won't. You think you're safe in this paltry F-350 anymore? Super Duty? Try Tour of Duty, you pathetic beta. At some point in this metaphorical journey, one might wonder why aircraft carriers? Well, this is the capitalist arms race future, is it not? Now that aircraft carriers have been standardized, thank God, we need infrastructure. Goodbye asphalt. Try hundreds of thousands of miles of federally funded, water-based aircraft carrier corridor. These waterways ensure efficient passage of your carrier so you save time on your commute to work. And should a corridor get too crowded, we can simply add one more lane. There, that's better. Of course, when you arrive at your destination, you will need to dock it in a designated parking space. Not to worry, the local city council is working tirelessly in the interests of carrier drivers and have passed compulsory carrier parking minimums, giving you confidence that there will always be ample parking waiting for you where you go. Finally, we come to housing. The amount of space a carrier takes up is about 276,000 square feet. And while some lament that you could fit some 1,200 units of housing in one aircraft carrier parking spot, well, you probably shouldn't, because denser housing will only exacerbate aircraft carrier traffic in that particular area. Oh, and it's not quite fitting with the neighborhood character. Now you might be saying, enough. this ridiculous metaphor has gone on long enough. There is no reality in which this is possible. To which I'll respond by kicking back to your narrator, who says,
Really? Really? I'm using hyperbole to demonstrate a nonsensical dynamic that's not so far off base from how we've actually been living. Oh, and I'm not done explaining yet. You think I'm done, mother? This brings me to my final point. Cars, and corresponding car brain, is at the heart of our inability to house ourselves. I know it might take a bit of imagination to think of the connection between transportation and housing, but I'll have you know they go together better than Vin Diesel to a Paul Walker. Look at it this way. The paper on car harms points out that a single parking space consumes 25 to 33 square meters. And I realize I'm teetering between metric and imperial, blah, blah, blah. About the same size as an average living space per person in China, South Korea, or Spain, and larger than the average living space per person in India, Brazil, Mexico, or Poland. Collectively, this means at least 40% of the global population lives in countries where the average living space per person is equal to or smaller than one parking space. In America, it's not uncommon for every unit of housing to be conditioned upon providing parking. Now, that may not sound all that bad in theory until you actually run a visualization, like this one by the Sightline Institute, demonstrating a median requirement of 1.5 parking spaces for every 2-bedroom apartment in America's Cascadia region. In case you haven't heard, land is expensive, especially land that people would like to live on because it's close to their job, friends, or family. Whose brilliant idea was it then to mandate that land be dedicated to housing not the human, but the inanimate object? And maybe you don't care about market rate types of housing. Say you care about homeless shelters and affordable housing. Well, you should still care about this. Case in point, Donald Shoup's book highlights the case of Casa Gloria in Los Angeles, a federally subsidized 46-unit apartment development. Built in 1993 by an offshoot of the National Association for the Hispanic Elderly, the project's cost per unit rose 38% and made it the most expensive affordable housing project in California history, thanks to LA's requirement of 2 parking spaces per apartment, never minding the fact that most of the residents were too poor or too old to own cars.
Planners... No, now somebody's gonna know how bad I am at speaking! Oh God! It was this for like a month with my North Korean video. It was like 8 hours of this every... Alright, planners everywhere are concerned about housing cost and urban sprawl, but they have not attempted to evaluate how parking requirements affect either housing cost or urban density. Scarce land and capital are shifted from housing for people to housing for cars. Zoning requires a home for every car, but ignores homeless people. By increasing the cost of housing, parking requirements make the real homeless problem even worse. People sleep in the streets, but cars park free in their ample off-street quarters. In city planning, free parking has become more important than affordable housing.
And that quote comes from the D-O-double-G, not this guy. America has become an asphalt society. The more we fall in love with it, the more we fall out of love with building actual homes, it seems. This obsession really accelerated in the mid-20th century when white flight epitomized relaxing our collective values in housing in favor of giving people easier access from far-flung suburban regions. Places that were once homes, especially for Black communities, were forcibly segregated using racial covenants, only later to become demolition sites for freeway construction. Freeways that still exist to this day. The website Segregation by Design has the most powerful library of visualizations of this shameful history. Take Oakland, California, for example, where the construction of freeways ripped straight through thousands upon thousands of homes. But the problem goes beyond just the direct one-to-one displacement of a home in favor of a road or a parking lot. This conversion also has ripple effects. Just like a theoretical aircraft carrier corridor, freeways not only take up a lot of space, but they also make the area undesirable for any other use than cars. Rates of asthma in West Oakland, for example, are severely worse than any other part of the region. The more roads we build, the more people want to drive. This also leads to inane proposals to widen corridors or add extra lanes. This, counterintuitively, due to the law of induced demand, actually creates more traffic rather than less. In other words, when you run the calculations, road widening essentially amounts to fighting traffic with more traffic. And if you want to learn more about induced demand, I'd recommend this video by City Nerd. We have already experienced the result of this destructive cycle. We now have more space dedicated to transportation than we do homes, when it should be the other way around. And when you think further about how much this can strain affordability of housing, it's quite surreal to think how much we deprive people of the excitement of being able to own or rent a home because of our endless obsession with asphalt. Wouldn't it be funny if home improvement reality TV more proportionately reflected the way that we use land?
You're not even there yet.
It is time to see your brand new backyard.
Open that door. Okay. Oh my God. That's crazy.
It's beautiful.
Cars, despite how fast they can go, are actually incredibly slow when you factor groups of cars, intersections, etc. In the spirit of the aircraft carrier metaphor, think about the sheer amount of space cars need. Look at these visualizations flooding the internet. I can look at these all day. Oh my God! Here's another way to look at it. Route capacity, aka the maximum number of vehicles, people, or amount of freight that can travel on a given route in a given amount of time, usually an hour. Route capacity of different transport modes vary, with rail being by far the most efficient at transporting people, while being a pedestrian and cyclist lies actually somewhere in the middle. What about cars? But don't despair. This actually gives us a reason for hope. The hope that we can create much more functional and interesting cities where people can get to places they need to go if we repurpose a lot of dead space toward housing. That is, if we're willing to come down off our car brain. Let me appeal to both drivers and non-drivers alike. Being in car hell affects all of us negatively, even drivers. Here's what I mean, drivers. Are you sick of your soul-sucking commute? Do you wish you could pay just a little more just to be able to get to work faster? Do you wish fewer cars were sharing the road with you? That's why you should have every interest in local initiatives to reduce congestion and fund public transit. Most recently, New York was the first US city to introduce congestion pricing. Basically, if you're driving at peak hours, you pay some money. Now, at face value, that seems like a bit of a raw deal, right? Why should I have to pay money just to use roads that I was otherwise using for free? But congestion pricing is having lots of benefits already. It's working. As of mid-January this year, New York saw a 34% drop in travel times across the 8 tunnels and bridges leading into the city. That's more time spending getting things done or spending time with your family rather than being trapped on the road. I hope by now that you're convinced that car culture and obligatory driving is a regressive tax on the poor. Congestion pricing has shown so far to be just the opposite, quite progressive, allowing greater taxation of wealthier suburbanites over middle-class city dwellers. This is all tantamount to way back when we taxed the tobacco industry. Our approach to cars should actually be similar. Car adoption tends to grow quickly to the detriment of society at large. We thus have every reason to tax it rather than to subsidize it and dedicate the proceeds to things that alleviate the problems that cars themselves create. You ride a bike to work? You should be incentivized to do so with protected bike lanes, not punished. You ride a subway to work? You deserve more clean and reliable trains with more frequent run times. This is all to say that if you are a driver, I want you to keep on driving. Yeah, what? I'll finish my sentence. I want you to keep on driving as long as you're willing to do one thing. Pay the cost. And no, I don't mean buying the car, insurance, gas, etc. I mean properly paying the proportional cost that car usage bores on society. Pay the cost of the ill health you're contributing to. Pay the cost of the risk of death. Pay the cost of the CO2 you're emitting into the atmosphere. If that is properly accounted for, I think you should drive to your heart's content. Hot take. At this point, I'm going to have to take something back. Bikes are cool. Okay, now you have the tools you need to recognize your own car brain. But if we're going to solve our spatial crises, here's my added plea that you become familiar with the little something that will save humanity. Bikes. Look, I'm not a bike enthusiast, but I ride pretty often, and I learned how to repair one. It's not that hard. So while I'm not a bike bro, I give bikes the respect they deserve. Case in point, in terms of efficiency, absolutely nothing beats pedal power connected to narrow profile wheels with reduced friction, aka bikes. So remember when I said bikes never look cool? Well, guess what? Well, let me blow your car brain for a second. There were some epic bike chases in movie history, some of which won Academy Awards. In fact, the 1980s saw a surge of interest in bikes through bike motocross, better known as BMX.
BMX bandits. They're wild in the streets.
Its depiction in film reflected a time where there was a lot of excitement for bicycles. In 1983, an Australian film, BMX Bandits, jump-started the career of a then unknown Nicole Kidman. Bikes became a symbol of extreme athleticism, a skillful art form, and even a mating ritual.
This could become a habit.
What if you can't give it up?
I mean, look at that face. Look at Nicole Kidman's face. Bikes did that. And did anyone remember the movie Rad? And that scene where they actually bought their own bikes to prom? That's 80s Lori Loughlin. And she's making this face. And if the world's first BMX kung fu fight isn't cool, well, I don't frickin' know what is anymore. Premium Rush with Joseph Gordon-Levitt wasn't that bad either, which gave a nod to New York City's bike messenger culture.
Fixed gear, steel frame, no brakes.
This is to say, don't count out any mode of transportation as not being cool. And while we're at it, let's lean into the ones that aren't the instruments of slow death for the planet. Now, a lot of you may hate bikes, but even if you're a driver, you have every reason to support the success and popularity of biking. Change is most ripe for cities that have very attractive city centers that would otherwise be ruined by vehicle traffic. Paris, over recent years, has shown how much cities can benefit by leaning into bikeable infrastructure. And if you care about pollution, Paris has actually made exciting progress in curbing it. But even before the Parisians, there is one country that has really shown the world how it's done. Yes, the Netherlands. Now, I won't spend a lot of time in going over the many ways in which the Dutch got it right. There's a channel that already does it, not just bikes. Will also relieve me of the obligation to properly pronounce the city of Utrecht.
Which brings me to Utrecht. Utrecht, Utrecht, Utrecht.
No, but seriously, some of these milestones simply can't be ignored. Look at it this way. The overturning of car dominance managed to reduce child fatalities from cars by 97% from 1970 to 2010. The air is cleaner, and there's also far less obesity. But not only that, their cities are just so much more interesting. Look at how the city of Amsterdam used to look back then. And look at it now. Back then, and now. Back then, and now. If you think about it, it's kind of crazy how much Americans pay to fly across the Atlantic Ocean to enjoy pedestrian-centric European cities, and then fly back home and do everything in their power to make the same style of city impossible at home. We should become more like the Dutch. Yeah, on second thought, there are, of course, some irreconcilable differences between Dutch and North American culture. But like all things, we can take the good parts and adapt them. We should all be a bit more open-minded. Speaking as an American, it's a melting pot. We take lots from different cultures to make the whole greater than the sum of its parts. We shouldn't be afraid of a little change modeled by our friends from across the sea. Utrecht. Utrecht. There, I actually said it. Het lijkt onmogelijk, maar dat is er niet hoor. At some point you might be asking, well, all this is good and well, but what power do I have as a concerned viewer? First off, if you don't have a bike, better yet, an e-bike, you should really consider buying one. Not only is it good for your health and a good transportation alternative for short distances, it's the quickest way of shaking off your car brain. As soon as you begin to look at the world unmediated by your windshield, trust me, things start to look very differently. You'll get an appreciation for the built environment that overfavors motor vehicles, which may discourage you at first, but also it opens up your imagination about what new and exciting possibilities your city could look like in the future. If you live in North America, chances are the level of car dependency is a direct result of local land use decisions. The downside of this hyper-localization is that it usually leads to city governments being captured by reactionary, not-in-my-backyarders, aka NIMBYs, who more likely than not also have car brain. To give you an example, just recently, the local governments in Toronto's metropolitan region are undergoing the biggest policy backlash against bikes in its history.
Our government will get traffic moving again by making sure we remove these silly bike lanes.
They're taking up one lane of traffic. They're backed up from here to Timbuktu. Just watch how quickly we get those bike lanes out of there.
The YouTube channel Oh the Urbanity has great videos on what this process looks like and how utterly nonsensical it can get.
For stating that this plan is ageist and favors. They've now added more CO2 because it's more gas.
All this is just emblematic of how NIMBYs have local governments by the balls. Even if you drive, you should consider what you can do to be part of that decision-making process. I guarantee you will be incredibly surprised as to how much impact you can have by simply showing up and giving public comment. One chair, one speaking slot is one needle tick shifted away from the power grasp of your local NIMBY. You don't have to let them dictate the future of the city in which you live, and at a collective level, the future of the planet in which you live as well. Find out initiatives that make your cities more vibrant and less car dependent, and show your city officials that you support them, that there are people who have the politicians' back if they ever get intimidated by NIMBY opposition. This can be in the form of new bike lanes, road redesign, or simply approving a dense housing project. My critique of car culture is not simply an overview of the objective damages that it's having on human health, economy, and environment. If you watched my channel long enough, I like to drill down further into the essence of any fundamental conflict and maybe identify a much more systemic pattern that we can recognize and hopefully do something about. For this reason, my contempt for car culture is not just about the damages, it's about the fundamental ethical disequilibrium that it has imposed on society. What entitles you to a car? What entitles you to the road you drive that car on? How do we respect your individual preference for convenience and luxury while respecting others who either don't drive or would opt for other modes of transit that don't impose a big burden on our society? In other words, if I need to sacrifice time or convenience for your access to driving, isn't it fair that I ask for a corresponding sacrifice to safeguard against being killed by you in a collision, or to breathe in your exhaust, or to financially subsidize your infrastructure? This is all to say that the fairest path forward in reconciling our relationship with motor vehicles yields no easy answers. The path is ugly and messy, but we don't have the time to wait. The time for pondering solutions is now. And while you ponder, I'll leave you with a song.
Here with Sol-Yu-sun to give us today's Korean word of the day.
It's 자동차.
And what does that mean in English?
In English, car.
Car. That is a lot of syllables for car, but there are plenty of cars around us. He's Sol-Yu-sun. That's today's Korean word of the day.
자동차, 자동차. Everybody wants me, why don't ya? Camry, F-150, Elantra. I have a very good life, I'm a 자동차. Successful capture of society, automotive supremacy, Instead of homes and walkability, freeways farther than the eye can see. You don't need me, but I need you. Vote against those bike lanes, I thank you. When I see people in a place, you know it'd make this better, a parking space. 자동차, 자동차, everybody wants me, why don't ya? Camry, F-150, Elantra, I have a very good life, I'm a 자동차. You may think I'm a tank, I'm an SUV, significant enabler of douchery. I'm one part weapon and at the same time a getaway car, now it's time to hide. A public menace to human health, unless of course you have a ton of wealth. Committing murder legally, I'm sorry you died, but it was a car, no one gives a shit. I take that back. No one gives a shit, unless you spin up a narrative about migrants. Freedom in a 2-ton cage, hedonic treadmill, things will never change. Corporate fuel dependency, the biggest f***ing con in history. 자동차, 자동차, everybody wants me, why don't ya? Camry, F-150, Elantra, I have a very good life, I'm a 자동차. Very good life, I'm a 자동차. A very good life, I'm a 자동차.
And what does that mean in English?
In English, car.
Car. That is a lot of syllables for car, but there are plenty of cars around us. He's Sol Yusun. That's today's Korean word of the day.